Welcome to Smart Supply Chain, a podcast for supply chain professionals who think and work smarter. I'm your host, Shireen Garrison, along with my sister in supply chain, Sarah Garrison. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Shireen.
Today, we are talking about what makes you a great leader and how to get ahead in supply chain in 2025. Our guest today is Radu Palamariu, and Radu is the group CEO of Alcott Global. He and his team work on C-level and top management executive search assignments with top Fortune 500 companies and local conglomerates, particularly for the manufacturing, logistics, transportation, supply chain management, and e-commerce space. That's a lot of spaces there, Radu. You're a busy guy. I also understand that you are a frequent speaker at industry conferences, and you're also the co-author of a best-selling book, From Source to Sold, which is a compilation of really good case studies in the global supply chain space. We'll talk about that a little bit. And you are also the host of Leaders in Supply Chain and Logistics podcast, which is currently ranked in the top 5 of industry podcasts. So we're excited to speak to you. Radu's also been featured in the World Economic Forum, Bloomberg, Forbes, as well as the MIT Supply Chain Talent Management magazine. And he's been named one of the top 3 global supply chain influencers on LinkedIn. Radu, welcome to Smart Supply Chain.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
We're very glad that you're here. And I know that you're based out of Singapore. So I appreciate you getting up early to get on a podcast first thing in the morning. Sarah, do you want to kick us off with a question for Radu?
Yeah. Radu, can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. It was a bit of a serendipity, to be fair. I don't know if a lot of people, when they start out, they want to be working in supply chain. I guess no kid at 5, 6, 7, if you ask them what do you want to be when you grow up, tells you that they want to be a supply chain professional. Maybe it's changed, but definitely not in my time. So I, as many people in the field, I kind of stumbled across it. I started my career doing management consulting on a number of industries. And at some point, 10, 15 years ago, somebody that I knew came to Asia, started a business in executive search and said, why don't you join? Because you have the skills from management consulting. So I joined, and I ended up doing supply chain searches because, in all honesty, the first clients were in manufacturing and supply chain. So I ended up doing that. And over time, you truly specialize, you truly understand, because the more searches you do, the more people you get to know, the more you really understand the industry. And that led me to 6 years ago, together with a number of other partners that are all focused on supply chain and value chain searches. We set up Alcott Global, the company that I'm now a group CEO at. And we've created this very specialized firm that only does end-to-end supply chain and value chain searches. We work with companies across the globe on their C-level -1, -2 positions. And I'm proud to say that we have a chance to work with some of the best clients in the world, and they trust us with some of the most important roles that they need to recruit for. So that is, in a nutshell, my career journey.
Excellent. Well, tell us more about Alcott Global's client base. Are there supply chain roles that face unique challenges when you're looking to recruit in at that executive level?
Almost all executive roles will have some level of challenge, because on top of the criteria for the roles, if you're hiring the CEO versus if you're hiring the chief procurement officer versus head of global manufacturing, there's always nuances, and clearly there are the technical elements of the role itself. But when you deal with executive roles, it's the element of soft skills and politics and relationships and different stakeholder expectations from the role within the company. That part is equally important to the technical part. And perhaps that's where clearly it's first and foremost our job to thoroughly have some discussions with the client to make sure that there is an alignment of what is everybody expecting from the role. So we have a recent case. It was a global head of continuous improvement in the board of a $15 billion company reporting to the CEO. So clearly the CEO had a strong impression of what he wanted from the role. The key stakeholders for the role were, however, the heads of the business units, the business operations, the guys that were actually running the different segments of the company. Those gentlemen also had expectations, and their expectations were slightly different from the CEO. So then it is also a journey of making sure that you align this, that you kind of look in the right direction, in the right pool of candidates. And then only you look at the tactical elements, right? Clearly, the person has to have a background in continuous improvement. But it came down to how much of that is important versus having an end-to-end operations and manufacturing exposure. So I would summarize to say aligning expectations, making sure the stakeholders are on the same page is equally important to knowing what tactically and technically you're looking for. And the combination of the two is what makes or breaks a successful recruitment process.
I would imagine that you've probably talked to so many people now as well. You might not have a fit for the company you're looking for at the time, but then you think back to, oh, I talked to somebody a few months ago that'll be a good fit for this role I'm looking at now. I imagine that happens quite a bit.
I'll give you an example. We are doing the search right now for Chief Supply Chain Officer, actually, of a nutrition company. It's a very specialized because it has a lot to do with baby food, infant nutrition type of industry that is concentrated in 5 to 10 companies, really. And the job also has some specifications because it's in a specific region with a specific remit. There's very few people that have done that. So we've literally done a global search. But the advantage that we have is that we have the connections with most of the former chief supply chain officer of all those companies. When I say former, it means that they don't have any more conflict of interest to refer, because clearly if you're actually in the job, you will not refer from your own team. That is a very basic thing that you're not, unless you really don't like them and you're trying to get rid of them. So then I would be a little bit cautious to take such referrals, right? But in general,
you might be nervous about that then.
Exactly. Once you're out of the job, you've been, retired. We knew more or less, I think just one we didn't know. So we asked all of them. Then on top of that, we went on our own network. Then on top of that, we went and asked people that are in the broader FMCG segment. So you can imagine that at the end of that, you get a market mapping of possible candidates to a degree of depth and detail that I think is very hard for somebody else to do. And that was done in 2 to 3 weeks.
So for those ambitious supply chain professionals out there who want to get in those executive level roles, let's talk about what your clients are looking for. You mentioned the difference between technical and soft skills. Let's talk about that a little bit more.
And maybe I'll bring now into the picture the chain model. So in our book, Source to Soul, that was published 2 years ago, myself together with Knut, who's a partner at McKinsey. So what we aim to do with the book is to actually answer the question, what makes a great supply chain leader? And also, how can you from supply chain end up in a board role, whether it's chief supply chain officer, chief operations officer, or whether it's the CEO itself? So in order to answer the question, we asked and interviewed 26 leaders. Some were in CEO positions, some were in CEO or CSO positions, to tell us what made them successful, and then distilled that into the chain model. And that will answer the question that you have on the soft skill side. So I'll talk on the soft skill side. So the chain model, in a nutshell, each letter stands for something, and that chain model is the answer to what makes a great supply chain leader and how can you get to a board role if that is what you want to do with your career. The letter C stands for collaboration. You need to be collaborative, and that is a buzzword that I think nobody will disagree with. But in practice, because practice is where sometimes it's a bit of a problem, and as they say, common sense is not common practice. In practice, how that works is, as a great supply chain leader, you really need to interact with all the different facets of the organization in a way that you also show them how you help them. If you're, let's say, you think about the different pillars of supply chain, you have planning, you have logistics, you have manufacturing, you have procurement. Let's simplify it to the SCORE model. If you're a head of procurement, again, you need to collaborate with the other three, because you can purchase the cheapest air freight, perhaps, right? Or whatever it might be, or the cheapest packaging. But then if the logistics gentleman has to air freight it because it's in some corner of the world that you don't have access to, I don't know if you've necessarily saved much, right? Because when you overall look at the P&L, you haven't done anything. So you need to have that skill of collaboration. H is a little bit, and I hinted to it, is holistic. The best supply chain leaders are the ones that have an end-to-end understanding, both in supply chain. So they are the people that have had experience across the 4 pillars that I just mentioned: plan, source, make, deliver. So that's ideal. You understand end-to-end supply chain. But even more important, if you want, it's the end-to-end of the business understanding. You always need to think business first, and how does supply chain help the business? So that's a holistic understanding, as opposed to, and there's nothing wrong, right? If your goal is to become the chief procurement officer, clearly you need to have a depth of expertise in procurement. But if you want to be the CEO or CSO, you cannot just follow procurement all your career. because then you will miss the other elements. A stands for adaptable. So adaptability means things change. It's a given. I think we're going to expect, or we can be sure that in the next 4 years, there's going to be things that you have plan A, you need to have plan B, C, D, and a lot of times you will not probably have maybe a mitigation plan because some of these things are incredibly difficult to predict. So how do you adapt? How do you think and act on your feet? I stands for influence. This is a skill that is one of the skills that is most lacking in supply chain professionals is how do you sell? So if you want the I and the N, and I'll get to the N after this, is the sales and marketing skills, which they almost don't exist in the supply chain professional arena. They need to pick it up, and some of them pick it up over time. But those that pick it up, the influencing skill is how do you go and talk to your commercial leader, to your sales leader, and influence him or her in terms of, look, let's work on this together and let's get the best solution. I give you an example. Chief supply chain officer of a chemical related company, right? So they were selling the washing gels for McDonald's, right? So he had it on the stock in blue, right? And then the general manager said, hey, I need it red because McDonald's always wants red. But ultimately, who cares at the fundamental level what color your soap is in? So the chief supply chain officer tried to influence the general manager, look, but we have it on stock, right? It's going to take me longer to get the color that you've always bought. Just tell them that you have this and see what happens. Because the general manager was disagreeing with that, then he went to the CEO, then they had a meeting, and then they all agreed that for the good of the business, it doesn't make sense to go incur the extra cost to make the red, to deliver it express when, you could just ask the client, do you want blue? And in the end, the general manager went, asked the client, do you want blue? McDonald's was okay. Problem solved. So that is influencing skills. And it might, again, sound such a basic skill, but the reality is that in most supply chain professionals, or not most, but a lot, are playing a game of Simon Says. The business says something, then they do. You got to step into a business partnership role, which comes with the influencing skills to always have a conversation with your partners, whether it's sales and marketing, whether it's finance, whether it's the CEO, to influence them to do for the good of the business. And lastly, chain model, N stands for narrative, and that is where you have this large organizations, a lot of them are managing hundreds of people. Narrative means how do you tell a story that inspires people, right? HP, for example, a friend of mine is the chief supply chain officer of HP, Ernest Nicholas, he joined HP 3 years ago. So he was telling me when he started, the key focus of him was what is the narrative? What do we stand for? What are we trying to do? How do we add value as the supply chain of HP? He got that together with his team. And then the second most important thing for him in the first 6 to 12 months was to repeat that story again and again, and to make sure that his teams were repeating that story again and again, that is clear for the organization. How do they add value? Because you see, if you don't do that as a supply chain professional, somebody else will.
We're just taking a quick break, and we'll be right back with Radu Palamariu.
Hey, Shireen, I've been thinking about how, as you're more senior in your career, your network becomes much more important or more valuable. Did you focus time on networking when you were early in your career?
I mean, that's an interesting question, Sarah, because when I think back on things that I was doing in my early career, a lot of the jobs that I got or companies that I became interested in were because of things that connections or people in my network.
Yeah, same. I mean, I think when I was younger, I viewed networking as joining associations or attending conferences. And that wasn't something that I really enjoyed doing. But what I did focus on was I did really try to develop my internal network. And I did that really so I would be better at my job. Being more informed of what was happening and what was coming made me a better decision maker. So I did focus quite a bit on those internal groups so that I could perform better in my position.
It's important also from an external network perspective to think about not just job searches or looking for a new career choice, but also just general career advice. Also, mentorship is really important, and talking to somebody that is maybe in a different kind of career path is good to talk to about, just coming up with ideas and giving you feedback on where you're at, and also making recommendations about maybe challenges that you're having in your career. All right, now let's get back to the conversation with Radu Palamariu.
I loved the chain model. It really was an example to me of all the great supply chain leaders that I've worked with in the past. exemplified those attributes when I work with them. And it is pretty rare in supply chain because we get so focused on our analytical skills or our logistics skills or whatever those tactical skills or expertise that we're building. So I loved it. How do you identify or articulate these skills to your potential clients? Like, how do you know somebody has those skills?
I mean, assessing that is sometimes difficult because some people are really good talkers and they can tell you that they do a whole bunch of things, but how do you make sure that they really do that in practice?
And vice versa, to be fair. Some people are very good doers and they're not
Not very good tellers.
and maybe they come across as modest, or they are modest, and then you might have a gem of a person, but you don't know for sure. So that's a little bit if you want, the magic of this profession is being a headhunter, the magic sauce, right? Or the Harry Potter glitter, because in fairness, there is no silver bullet. And clearly there's psychometric tests and there's all sorts of assessments that companies do that do help up to a certain point. However, the most powerful and almost 100% reliable source is back to referrals. Because referrals and reference checks, because sometimes maybe you will not get the candidate referred, but then you should have the ability to do informal ref checks, because nobody's going to give you a ref check that will talk badly about them. So having enough network that then you go and pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, look, just need to ask you some questions just between us, right? This is not, on the record about a person. Then typically you need to do that threefold. You need to do it with their bosses. Typically everybody is good at managing their bosses. Otherwise it's a career limiting move. Okay, the bosses, peers, that's where you start getting some interesting information. Clearly it tends to be very real. And then with their staff, that's probably the crux of it. How did they treat their staff and how do the staff look at them? So if you have the ref check done well, I think that will tell you. That will tell you clearly. Of course, there's cues you can pick up in an interview. The client will pick up in an interview. Yes, it's mostly to do with presentation skills, communication skills, and all of those things are important because also, if you're very good but you can't communicate and articulate and you are on the board, that also doesn't work. On the flip side, if you're very good at communicating and marketing yourself that you have no content, that's also not very good. Yeah. So, and that's harder to tell. Yeah. Because there's people and senior management, most of them are good communicators. It almost comes with the territory. So then you need to kind of dig under the surface, but what exactly have you actually done?
So if somebody really wants to be on the C-suite, that's what their aspirations are. And, they're going after all these different attributes that you're bringing up in the chain model. What things do you think people should do if they feel like maybe they're lacking a bit in one of those areas?
Look, there's plenty of trainings. And if you identify that you're really lacking on presentation skills or communication skills, that's, there's easy things that can be done. But I would say that what is important, and I've seen the best do, it's almost like performance sports. What do? They have very good coaches, right? In the professional world, there are executive coaches and there is merit to that. And I would say the other merit is have great mentors. Almost all of the best people and best executives I know, even if they are now at CEO level or chairman of the board level, they still have networks of mentors. And you don't just need to have one, you can have several. Trusted advisors that you go to and they give you real and honest advice of where you stand, what can you do better, and so on. Even headhunters, I've gotten a candidate a few years ago and I love the way he did it. He asked me, how do I benchmark him against all the other people in his role? Because I obviously get to see that a lot. And then to give him some feedback on what can he work on more. Even that is a good mindset, to find those people who can give you feedback of where you stand compared to your peers and what can you do to improve. I think that's something that people can do more of. Find good mentors. Treasure those relationships, right? People that have walked the path that you want to walk, right? If you want to be CEO, find some people that have already done that and get them as mentors. Get a coach, as well as constantly benchmark yourself with it doesn't extend only to your organization, but also externally, and see what more could you do to be in the best position to get that job when it comes up.
Yeah, that has to be a really active activity.
You have to be willing to accept feedback as well. That's the hard one for, I think, a lot of people, is actually hearing negative feedback that they might need to work on. It's, it's tough.
That's such a fundamental thing to, are you actually a leader or not? Because if you can't take feedback, you're not a leader. Fundamentally, you should be comfortable and have the self-leadership to accept that nobody is perfect, that we all have flaws, and the only way in which you can truly be a good leader is to take feedback. You don't need to work on everything. I read something that stuck with me yesterday. It was like, probably what makes you weird is your greatest strength. So you don't need to work and improve every single thing. And, best leaders have flaws. It's not a problem. Just complement your team with it and make sure you have somebody that complements that particular flaw. But whatever you're very strong at, and maybe what makes you a bit weird in a good way, work on that and expand that. And clearly, yes, if you're lacking in the chain model, you're lacking communication skills, and you want to become board member, well, that is a fundamental skill you need to work on, because otherwise you will not be in a board if you're not a proper good communicator. So there you need to be able to take that feedback and then work on it.
Did you want to share your weirdest attribute or strength with us, Radu?
For me, it's been a journey to just focus on strength. And I have a few, not that many actually, but I have a few that I think I'm fairly good at: communication, marketing, that part. How do you present? And then relationships. How do you build relationships with people quite fast? And I think these two are my good strengths.
Your superpowers.
Superpowers.
Yeah.
I lack on a lot of things.
If your superpowers, you can hire good people on your team.
Exactly.
You can really
So
be
that's what I
successful that way.
I try to do, because I suck at a lot of things, like attention to details. Like if you ask me to start planning things in advance, I fold like a folding chair. There's many things that I'm completely terrible at. But I'm very good at a few things. And maybe to mention a weird, you can call it weird. I love memes and jokes. And I've actually created a list where I have a number of C-level executives on it, where I share memes with them. I mean, 1 or 2 a day, because also that list sends to me. So I'm actually not spending time actively looking for it, but I always receive some. And then the funniest I send onwards on that list. But what has intrinsically happened, I have actually built so much better relationship with those people, because typically they have a sense of humor. And definitely the ones that I have on that list, which are actually my friends, they have a sense of humor. And the fact that you do this in such an informal, and it took me a while. This was an acquired, because at the beginning I was like, oh, this is weird. I mean, how can you do that? This is not right. You should be formal and politically correct and whatever, right? You can't just do that with your clients or with your... Actually, you can, and that's what makes really authentic relationships. And people do give business and work with people they trust. And you can say that this is the first thing. I have many others probably, but this is the first thing you can say. I have a weird meme list with CEOs that I share memes, and they, reciprocate. Yeah, that's fun.
I think it's good that you have a natural bond with people. That definitely helps in your workplace and also with your clients as well.
For sure.
So for those ambitious supply chain professionals, any advice on what they should be focusing on for their CV? Are there things that help make candidates stand out, either in hard skills or experiences or the way they put it together?
There's plenty of advice. I would perhaps go one level up. And again, in the context of once you hit senior director, VP level, the CV is important in a sense that it's hygiene, right? If your CV looks bad, you're going to look bad. But basically, an amazing CV versus a decent CV, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get the job because of the CV. So the CV matters less. What matters, and what most people, again, underestimate, and I've alluded a little bit here at coaches, mentors, and so on, but it's actually networking at large. I spoke to recently to a senior executive, been with the same company for 20, 25 years. We were talking, and I realized pretty fast that he's extremely focused on the job, had done incredibly well in that company where he had multiple positions. But he himself said, sometimes, Radu, I see all these people that have left the company and have landed better jobs. And I'm wondering, how? Because I'm better than them. They left, some of them were let go. I'm still here. I've grown in the company, but I'm wondering, maybe I'm not doing something. And I said, yes, you're not. You're not networking. You're so involved in your job, and there's nothing wrong. It might be the best job and the best company, but again, you don't know what you don't know. So the networking piece is something that, because supply chain professionals tend to be doers, I mean, I'm overgeneralizing, but they tend to do things. They tend to be very conscientious and disciplined and hardworking in general. And you got to network. Again, it's important to have a decent CV. But networking, who are you meeting? Who are you networking? Meet headhunters, meet other senior executives. Activate your network, go actively at events. That's what's going to get you the next senior job. I'm not talking entry jobs. I'm not talking mid-level jobs. I'm talking senior jobs.
And I say start young. I think you, even very junior in your career, should be really focusing on networking and building connections with people.
Is it different, Radu? You kind of recruit globally. Is it different in different parts of the world? Is it different in, Singapore than it is in the US, than it is in Europe?
There's always nuances, yeah. There's always nuances, and perhaps internationality is one. In Asia, even within the same country, you can have 13 or 15 different languages or hundreds of languages. If you talk about India or China or Indonesia, you need to be a lot more mindful of. It's one thing to deal with an Indonesian versus a Thai versus a Vietnamese versus a Chinese. There's cultural differences. And then there's a lot of factors around that. So I think Asia is the most diverse from just nationalities and nuances perspective. Europe, there's more countries, but still it's a fairly compact block, and US are fairly compact. And then, of course, you have considerations around the location and how easy is it to attract people in different parts of the world as opposed to big cities. But I would say also what has changed, perhaps to add the nuance, over the last 10 years or so, people used to be a lot more mobile. You used to send people abroad. They used to jump at the opportunity. Now it's a lot less people that are willing to change countries to go abroad to do that. And that raises a problem because, again, the more you want to progress in your career, you got to have an international exposure. You got to have lived in 2 continents, I would say, because that kind of complements your worldview.
Yeah, most big businesses are global. So it's interesting that has changed. What are some other trends that you're seeing? What's new for 2025? You mentioned tariffs.
Yeah, well, the geopolitics and tariffs is not new, but I think the velocity and the overnight type of actions is back, and perhaps that is going to be keeping a lot of people up at night. And when you're running a very complex supply chain, if you're an automotive or electronics company, and semiconductors, there's a lot of things that are now prohibited to come out of China. And still, China runs a lot of the raw materials, as you know, and a lot of the assemblies. It's complex. It's complex. So that is very high on most people's minds. I think AI clearly is keeping everybody on their toes. I have not seen true applications in supply chain. Of course, most of us probably are using ChatGPT and the likes as individuals. Is there a company that has an AI-driven supply chain? Probably not, because the fundamental problem that hasn't been fixed is the quality of the data of most companies sucks. However, are most, if not all, people convinced and clear that AI is a game changer? I would say yes. Hence, all of them are trying to learn, see what can they do, and stay at the forefront of that AI and technology at large, right? So clearly organizations are trying to be faster, more agile. How can they, just be closer to the inputs from the consumer side? So I think that customer side, so that continues. And I think what we're dealing with in 2025, just the pace of change is just unreal. I think these things are important. So the part with organization, of course, clearly talent and skills. And on one side, how do you upskill them and help them constantly upskill to attract great individuals to the organization? So this whole bucket of talent and human resources is very important for people. I would say these 3 things: geopolitics and tariffs, AI and technology at large, talent, and how do you best use that are big topics for 2025 for supply chain leaders. Not necessarily new, but very, very real.
Bigger and faster every year.
Scarier.
Got to keep our heads on.
Scarier and fun.
That's right. Got to stay agile and stay on top of things. Well, we're almost out of time, but we do have one last question for you, Radu, that we have to ask everybody. What is the best vacation that you've ever taken? Or do you have a dream destination that you really want to go to? We want to hear about it.
The more recent one that comes to mind, there is a very special island in Indonesia called Bali. We had never been at the southern eastern tip of Bali. There's an island called Nusa Penida, and that's quite off the beaten track. There's not so many tourists still. So we went there with my wife for our wedding anniversary last year, and it was quite an interesting experience. Because 1, it's still fairly raw, and that makes it special. 2, you can go snorkeling, and they have this huge manta rays, kind of think 4 humans put together size, and you can see them up close. It's just some fantastic features. And 3, there's some beaches where you have to go down almost vertically for about 500 meters on somehow made in concrete up to a point, the stairs, but then you kind of make do with the rocks and whatnot. And it's a hell of a ride up and down. And then you end up in this really nice, small beach type where huge waves. My wife went in and, wave just kicked her, and she was like, okay, I'm not going in again. But I guess that combination of adrenaline and the discovery journey, and also the sheer difficulty of reaching that place, really made it an experience that got imprinted in my mind. So if you are into that type, Nusa Penida, Bali is a recommendation from me.
Excellent narrative.
Very, very nice. Well, that will have to be the last word because we are out of time. Thank you so much, Radu, our expert on executive search from Alcott Global, and being our guest on Smart Supply Chain, letting us know all the details about how to get ahead in 2025. Thanks, everybody. We're the Garrison Sisters. We'll catch you next time on Smart Supply Chain, or check us out anytime at alon.com.